Hi everybody, I'm Manjinder Kainth from Graide, and I'm here to talk to you today about using artificial intelligence to reduce grading workload and increasing student feedback. Now, I want to start today's presentation by talking a bit about my personal experience with assessment and feedback. About 10 years ago now, I started my undergraduate degree in theoretical physics. And while I did that degree, I had lots of weekly problem sheets, the goal of which was for me to try real-life problems and get hands-on feedback on my approaches to try to let me understand the course content a lot better. But unfortunately, quite often it would take 2 weeks, sometimes 3 weeks to get my feedback back. By then, I'd often forgotten what the questions were or what I even answered. And I'd probably already submitted the next assignment and probably was making the same mistakes again. We'd often have automated solutions like multiple choice quizzes or sometimes some computer algebra system quizzes, but I often found that the feedback wasn't that personalized because it never really affected my method, and it was quite generic, really. And then after I completed my degree, I started a PhD, and the roles became reversed because I became a TA, where I did lots of teaching, but I also did lots of marking of student work. And to my surprise, I found it quite difficult to provide that feedback within that 2 to 3 week period. I'd want to give that feedback really quickly. And there were quite a lot of issues that caused that to be the case. So in terms of formative assessment, there were really 3 big issues that I noticed as a TA and which led us to build Graide. The first is that there are fragmented systems. And what I mean by that is that quite often a lecturer is creating assignments in one place, the students are attempting it in a different place, the markers are marking it in another place, and the students are receiving their feedback in a different place. You have to do a lot of administrative overhead, so you have to collate a lot of work, and you have to distribute it, recollate it, you've got to moderate it, you've got to add up all the marks and put it into a learning management system. All of that stuff adds up a significant amount of time. As a TA, I was on a team where we marked over 200 students' work. So we needed multiple markers, but the result of that caused consistency issues because it was very hard for us to ensure that we were all marking to the same standards and providing the same feedback. And lastly, it was incredibly repetitive and often was the direct source of it taking a significant amount of time when it came to marking work. It's not like the answers were identical, but the approaches were really similar, which meant that we were giving very similar feedback to very similar approaches. So the question is, how do we design a system that can tackle these 3 areas? Well, how do we fix the fragmented systems? An end-to-end assessment and feedback platform. Put everything in one place so that you don't have all those 4 different moving parts. It's all happening in the same place to remove those bottlenecks. And then use technology to replace administrative tasks. There's no reason that we should be collating and distributing work manually when computers can do that for us. And why are we adding up marks and putting them into a learning management system? We can do that automatically as well. And this also allows to have increased oversight in, to be honest, quite an old-fashioned process. How do we address the consistency issues? Well, thanks to the first point of adding technology, we can build a single source of truth for feedback, a rubric that is shared amongst all markers that have access to that marking. That means that everyone is referencing the same set of feedback and allows them to mark the exact same way. And while we're at it, we can allow for historical edit propagation. What I mean by that is, if halfway through the marking or during a moderation process, we look through the feedback and the rubric and we decide that something should be worth different marks or the feedback should be slightly different, we can change it in one place and have that edit propagate for all students with the same feedback. And this can actually provide educational opportunities from a pedagogical point of view for those markers. Quite often it's difficult for us to train markers consistently and over time because of that lack of oversight and lack of auditing. But now we can see what feedback is being added, edit it to ensure that there aren't any errors, but also provide learning opportunities for those markers. The most important one is building a system for faster feedback. Now, this is the system that we've built at Graide. The idea is that you begin by submitting a student work, and a student's homework comes in alongside the entire set. We take one off the top of the set and we ask the question, has this been seen before? If it hasn't, it goes to a teacher. That teacher then grades it, gives it high quality feedback, and we can take that feedback and that answer together to provide an AI to learn that process. So that when the next one comes along, and it is quite similar, we can partially an optional review threshold, completely automate it, and provide feedback to students. This idea is trying to break down that process of giving feedback. So when we're giving feedback, we're often building a mental model for what the students are doing correctly and incorrectly, and what feedback we want to provide to those methods. The issue is there's a manual component that takes a significant amount of time, that is physically writing down the feedback, but there's also a mental component that takes a significant amount of time, which is building that model. We can improve the manual process with technology and the mental process with this artificial intelligence. So, what does it look like? Let's take a look, shall we? The first thing we're going to look at is grading PDFs. I want to highlight here that there is no artificial intelligence on when grading PDFs. That will come later. So you can see that we've broken up this page into two parts. The right side containing the student answer, and the left side containing shared amongst all the markers that have this question to mark. They can all see this exact rubric, which means they all mark the same way. If I edit this rubric in one place, that edit is propagated to all other students with the same feedback to ensure consistency. We can do things like group feedback together, rearrange feedback to allow for this kind of framework to be set up, even collapse these groups to make things quite easy. In terms of providing feedback to images and scans, we wanted to replicate the process of giving feedback on paper. Now, if I had this script in front of me, I would basically circle the area that was incorrect, and I'd find some space in the odd bits at the margin, and I would give that bit feedback. So to replicate that process, we can simply draw a box over the bit that we want to give feedback to, and we simply click on the feedback that we want to give. And then you can see this feedback, as we hover over it, it gets highlighted, is attached directly to the script to highlight exactly where the thing has gone wrong. We can then mark this as done and move on to the next script. This allows us to mark per question and speeds up the entire marking process. So we can mark this one as well and carry on. Now let's take a look at some AI marking for mathematics. The interface here is very similar to the interface we had before, except now we have a digitized response. There are multiple ways that students can enter this response, usually typing up their answer with our sophisticated editor, or also using optical character recognition or handwriting recognition. Highlight the area that we want to give feedback to. In this case, I'm going to care a lot about the method. I'm going to care about the form of the answer. I'm going to even care whether or not the student has simplified after the fact. Now we can argue about whether or not this is good feedback, but it's more to highlight the nuances that can be picked up by the platform. As I click next, that is going to be learnt by our AI. It's going to recognize those patterns in other responses and begin to build a model for how to mark this particular question. And as you can see, I've only marked 2 questions, and already the AI has begun to learn. It has suggested me feedback based on the way that I've marked those previous questions. If this was incorrect for any reason, I could simply delete feedback and apply new feedback. In this case, it is correct, and we can just move on to the next script. We've recently updated the platform to allow for grading of short answer text questions as well. Keep in mind that this is marking the content of the answer, not the quality of the written communication, but the idea is very similar, that we would highlight the components that we want to give feedback to, and we would just simply click and give the feedback that we wanted to. We would interpret the context of the area that was highlighted in the wider context of the answer to recognize those patterns for the other solutions that have gone by. Now we're going to talk a bit more about the results from the testing. First, we're going to take a look at the PDF results. Keep in mind that there is no AI on PDF grading. It's only workflow benefits. So we've got over 22,000 questions that were graded within 0 to 14 seconds, and actually almost 7,000 questions were graded in 0 to 6 seconds. That's really highlighting the workflow benefits of this system. And that is, you only need to write once and use multiple times. And that's also highlighted in our feedback utilization. So we can see that the feedback is utilized 12 times over how much it's been written. Over 250,000 words of feedback has been given, but only 20,000 words of feedback was typed. That means that you were able to use the feedback 12 times for every time that you wrote it on average. To writing and giving feedback, it allows you to actually give more feedback as well. And we saw that 53% faster grading. So the median amount of time it took to grade work was 5.3 minutes, whilst the original time in our study was 11.2 minutes. And we can actually take a look at this histogram here for the amount of time it took to grade questions. And you can see this really nice peak right at the start, highlighting that this is really one of those long tail graphs where most of the work is actually in the low end and not the high end. And the goal really here is to highlight the fact that what we want to do is we want to shift this across significantly when we add in the AI, because we'll be removing that manual part for the 0 to 6 or the 0 to 14 seconds. With that in mind, let's talk a little bit about the AI results. In terms of the AI results, we took an existing assignment and analyzed the amount of time it took to mark that assignment, digitized that, and got the markers to mark it again in Graide a year later with AI assistance. We were able to compare the median time alongside the amount of feedback that was given. But we were also able to analyze the serial time it takes to mark submissions. The first thing we want to highlight here is that over 7 times more feedback was given. So the feedback per script went from 23 words to 166 words, which is very significant. And that's really highlighting that feedback utilization, the ability of incentivizing a system where you can write once and use multiple times. And the really cool thing here is we actually found that 74% time reduction. So the median grading time went from 11.2 minutes to 2.8 minutes, which is a significant reduction in the amount of time it takes to grade work. In fact, we've recently updated the algorithm and are doing some preliminary testing, and it has pushed this up to 89%. And in the graph here, you can actually see that the amount of time it takes to mark the assignments rapidly drops. The investment in time at the beginning is in building the rubric, which makes sense because you start off with a blank rubric and you build the rubric based on the results that the students are providing. But over time, you're using that rubric that you've already built, so it's quicker. And then over the time after that, you get even more time savings because of the automation that's built in. The last thing I want to say is that we are building the future of assessment and feedback. We're doing this in a very collaborative way with partners such as Jisc, the University of Birmingham, and the EdTech Evidence Group, by taking real feedback and building a platform that has the features that educators need. We're partnering with the other universities that you can see there with multiple pilots, and if you want to get into contact with us, please do so with the contact information on the slide. And I'd like to open up the floor for questions. Thank you very much.